Okay, so in the second half, we're going to look at the equations for absolute value rather than expressions. So this opening remark is going to basically guide you through how to set up the equations every single time. So say we've got real numbers a and b, and then b has got to be something positive. That's important. It'll come up in a little bit. So say you start off with this. If you have the absolute value of a is equal to b. What that means, let's say if, I guess, then you could say that a is either equal to b or a is equal to negative b. All right, so that actually comes out looking really similar to this. So if you know you come up with an absolute value of 6, the stuff on the inside, oops, I'm pointing to something you can't see, sorry. If you know the absolute value comes out to be 6, positive 6, it means the stuff inside the absolute values either could have been positive 6 or a negative 6. So that's exactly what you've got written here. You know if the absolute value comes out to be b, that means the stuff on the inside could have been positive a or it could have been negative a. And having the negative here is no different than having it here. Okay, so for example 2, we've got just an absolute value symbol on the left and then just a positive number 8 on the right. So you basically go off of this model that I gave you right here. So y plus 3 represents an expression. So with absolute value, remember you want to think of it as like a distance. So when you read the absolute value bar, read it as the distance of y plus 3 from 0 is 8 units. So the numbers that are 8 units away from 0 are positive 8 or negative 8, because remember direction doesn't matter. So it could be 8 units to the left or 8 units to the right. So you say the distance of y plus 3 from 0 is 8 units. So it could be positive 8 or negative 8. So we set up one equation for each. It could be positive 8 or it could be negative 8. Because think of subbing that back in. If y plus 3 was equal to 8, we know the absolute value of 8 is 8. Or if y plus 3 was equal to negative 8, we know the absolute value of negative 8 would also give us 8. So that's why we have those two options, because it could be distance to the left of 0 or to the right of 0. And then from here, we just go through and we solve for y. So remember, when we're solving equations, we want to do the opposite of whatever we see in front of us. So since the 3 is being added, we do the opposite and we subtract it. And whatever we do to the left, we do to the right. So these cancel. We get just the y, which is what we were looking for. And then 8 minus 3 is 5. So that's one of our answers. And then next we do the same thing here. The opposite of adding 3 is subtracting 3, which we do from both sides. And then we get y by itself equals negative 11. So let me run you guys through that calculator check real quick, just to remind you. So what we first do, and I will open up a calculator page, we store our answer. So we start by just hitting the 5, and then you hit this control button, and then the button above the 9, variable, and then whatever your letter is. So on the alphabet pad, we select the y. Okay, so what I just did is I replaced the letter y with a 5. So anytime you type in a y, it's going to use 5. And then we type in this equation. So if you see where the equal sign is right here next to trig, if you hit control and then hit that button, you can take, actually, no, there's probably a better way to do that, I'm sorry. If you hit this button to the right of the 9, hit this button, and then if you scroll right here, you can get the absolute value. Yeah, that's a better way to do it, because then you only have to hit one button instead of putting the absolute value on the left and the right. So type in y plus 3, and then make sure you arrow out of the absolute value signs before you hit the equals 8s. Okay, so that's true. So we know that that answer is the right answer. So let's check the negative 11. So now store negative 11, our second answer, store that in for y. And then you don't even have to retype the equation. If you hit this up arrow a couple times, see how this equation is highlighted? If you hit enter, it'll just paste it. So you don't have to type it again. So we get a second true, which means we've got 2 correct answers. So almost every time, absolute value equations will have 2 different answers. So let's check example 3. So if you remember in example 2, I pointed out the fact that the absolute value symbol was by itself. This absolute value symbol is by itself right here. You can't go from this to this until you get the absolute value by itself. That's super, super important. So notice with example 3 that the absolute value is not by itself. So I have to start with that. So I'm going to start by subtracting the 5, because the opposite of addition is subtraction. So we subtract from both sides. Okay, so that will cancel. So we get the absolute value of 6 minus 4t comes out to be equal to negative 5. Okay, so now remember in the example up above how I pointed out that this has to be true. B has to be greater than or equal to 0. So this number has to be positive. Okay, so if we look at example 3, this number is negative. And so we get to this point and we kind of stop. Since this number isn't positive, this statement here says I can't set this up. And let me explain why. So I will tell you the answer is that there's no solution. So this is the symbol that you guys are going to use for no solution. I'll write it out, but anything shorthand is always better because it's quicker to write and it saves time. So this is the answer that you'll give. There's no solution. And the reason is, if we read this the way we read this one, we say the distance of 6 minus 4t from 0 is negative 5. As soon as you read it that way, hopefully you should realize that that's not possible. We talked in the previous section about how the distance has to be positive, and so you can't have a negative number as your distance. It's not possible to be negative 5 units away from 0. So anytime you have a negative on the other side, you can just instantly write that there's no solution. Okay, so hopefully, even if you forgot about this and you set up two equations, when you went to check them in your calculator, you should find that you actually get a false statement and that it doesn't work. Okay? Okay, example 4, we're going to get a little bit more complicated here, but we're kind of going off the same principle. So see how this one has the absolute value by itself. So that's a start. We always need it by itself. And then up here, see how we took the a out of the absolute value. And then here we just took this exactly as it was. And then here we took this and we made it negative. And that's exactly what happened here. We took the y plus 3 out of the absolute value for both of these. And then here we took the 8 exactly as it was. And then here we took the 8 and made it negative. So that's what we're doing down here with this example. For both of these, we're going to take the 8 plus y out of the absolute value. And then let me remind you again. So here we took the 8 exactly the way it is. So here we're going to take the 2y minus 3 exactly the way it is. And then for the second option, we took the 8 and we made it negative. So here we're going to take the 2y minus 3 and we're going to make it negative. So instead of 2y, we're going to make it a negative 2y. And then instead of minus 3, we're going to make it plus 3. So it's like making it exactly the opposite of the way it was before. And then we're going to still solve our two equations. So this jumps back to what we did in the previous section. So what I'm trying to do is I want to get the variable by itself and then the numbers on the other side. So like here, for instance, I have a 2y. Here I have a y. So you need to subtract one from the other. It doesn't matter which way you go. So you could subtract 2y from both sides. Okay, so here they cancel each other out. Here I still have this 8. And then positive y minus 2y gives me a negative y. And then here all I have left is the 3. Be super, super careful here. Make sure you keep the negative. Okay, and then I'm trying to get this y by itself. So there's a positive 8 right here. So I subtract the 8. Do the opposite of what you see. So this cancels. So I still have a negative y. Again, be super careful to keep that negative. Negative 3 minus 8 gives us a negative 11. And then the last thing we need to do, see how there's a negative in front of this y. That's technically like a negative 1. So you want to divide both sides by negative 1. Okay, so we get just a y on the left, and then negative 1 divided by negative 11 divided by negative 1 leaves us with positive 11. So that's one of our answers. So we're going to do the same thing over here. Start by adding 2y to both sides. And then what I'm going to do this step and kind of combine them into one. So what I did was I moved the variables from the right-hand side. I'm also going to move the numbers from the left-hand side. So I'm going to subtract 8. Okay, so subtract that from both sides. I'll cancel the 8s right here. So here I have y plus 2y, that gives me 3y, equals, and then I have 3 minus 8, that's a negative 5. Okay, so last thing, this y is being multiplied by a 3. The opposite is to divide it. These 3's reduce down to just 1, so I have y equals negative 5/3. This is here to remind you, you should always check your solutions, especially with absolute value. So let's check here. So we're going to take 11 and store that as y, and then type in this equation. So this weird button next to the 9, select the absolute value, type in 8 plus y, and then make sure you arrow out of the absolute value before you hit the equal sign, which is right here. And then 2y minus 3. So hit enter, and that's true. So we got that one, and then let's check the other one. So now take -5/3 and store that in as y. Okay, and then remember, you don't have to retype, just arrow up a couple times until we've got that selected. So hit enter, and that turns out to be false. Now, we didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes with absolute values, something just goes weird, and even though it seemed like it was going to be the right answer, sometimes it's just not, and that's something called an extraneous solution. We will learn more about those as the sections go on. Okay? All right, so one last example here. Really, really similar. Remember what I said before, how this absolute value has to be by itself. So what we need to do in this stage is we need to get rid of that 2, and it's being multiplied. Be really careful here. It's not being added, so you don't subtract 2, you divide by 2. So divide both sides by 2. These will cancel. And then 8 divided by 2, we get 4. So there's a 4x, and then we have the absolute value of 6x minus 2. Okay, so just like the previous example, you've got 2 setups that you need to make. First, you take the 6x minus 2 and set it equal to exactly what you see on the other side. Or, for your other option, you take the 6x minus 2 and then set it equal to the opposite of what you see here. So you make the 4x negative. Okay, and then just like before, you're just going to solve both the equations and check them. So here I want to get, I already have just a number over here, so I'm going to subtract the 6x from both sides. Okay, so this will cancel. I have a -2. Remember, be careful, don't lose that negative. Equals 4x minus 6x gives me a -2x. And then I'm trying to get the x by itself. So it's currently being multiplied by a -2, so I'm going to divide by -2. So -2 divided by -2 leaves me with a +1, and that's my first potential value of x. Remember, I have to check it before I'm sure. And then over here, I'm going to do the same first step. I'm going to subtract the 6x from both sides. So these cancel. I still have a -2, not a +2. And then a -4 and a -6 leave me with a -10x. Okay, last step here before I check my answers. This x is being multiplied by a -10, so I cancel that out by dividing by -10. And then be careful here. A lot of people want to say that's 5. This is not 5. 2 over 10 reduces down to 1/5, not 5. Okay, so that's my second potential answer. Last thing I will do here is check them. So take 1 and store it in as x, and then type your original equation here. So 8x equals 2. Type the 2 first before you get the absolute value. Remember, right here next to the 9. Absolute value of 6x minus 2. So check that answer. That one turns out to be true. So one of them works. And then type in 1 divided by 5 for 1/5. Store that in as our second option for x, and then go ahead and arrow up so you don't have to retype it. Hit enter to paste it, and then hit enter to check it. And that one turns out to be true. So sometimes they both work, and then sometimes one of them might not work, and it's just all because of the way that positive and negative values turn out. Okay, so that is it for 1-4.